On the morning of the 6th of April 1965, a British test pilot named Jimmy Dell was sitting in a social club near Boscombe Down, waiting on a fuel pump. His aircraft was fixed, fueled and ready. It was supposed to fly that afternoon. Instead, a voice on the television in the corner of the room said the word "cancelled," and Dell put down his drink and walked out into a Britain that would never again build a fighter of its own alone. The aircraft was called the TSR-2. In the 4 years it existed, it became, depending on who you ask, either the most brilliant military aircraft Britain ever designed, or the most expensive lesson in ambition the country ever paid for. Both are true. That is what makes this story worth telling. Because this isn't really a story about one aeroplane. It's a story about a single afternoon in Whitehall that decided, quietly and almost by accident, that Britain would never again build a world-leading combat aircraft on its own. Everything that came after, every joint venture, every multinational committee, every fighter jet built by 4 countries instead of one, traces back to this one decision. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what Britain had. In 1949, the de Havilland Comet became the world's first commercial jet airliner, years ahead of Boeing or Douglas. British engines powered half the aircraft on Earth. British radar, British ejector seats, British jet technology were being licensed and copied from Washington to Moscow. This wasn't a nation playing catch-up. For a brief stretch after the war, Britain was the aviation industry the rest of the world was chasing. But that lead came at a strange cost. Britain had dozens of aircraft manufacturers, all competing for the same handful of government contracts. Proud, independent companies, each building brilliant aeroplanes nobody could afford in quantity. The government could see the industry heading toward exhaustion. Something had to consolidate it. And in the late 1950s, one aircraft became the excuse to force that consolidation to happen. In 1956, the Royal Air Force wrote a requirement so demanding that no single company could realistically meet it. They wanted a bomber that could fly at twice the speed of sound at altitude, then drop to 200 feet and cross enemy territory at treetop height under Soviet radar, deliver a nuclear weapon with pinpoint accuracy, and land on a rough strip barely half the length of a normal runway. Reconnaissance, strike, and standoff attack, all from one airframe. To force the industry to even attempt it, the government made a condition. It would only award the contract to a consortium. So in 1960, under direct government pressure, 4 fierce rivals, English Electric, Vickers Armstrongs, Bristol and Hunting, were welded together into a single company, the British Aircraft Corporation, purpose-built to produce this one aeroplane. The rest of the industry folded itself into a second giant, Hawker Siddeley, just to survive what was coming. The result of that forced marriage was the TSR-2. 89 feet long, a shoulder-mounted delta wing, 2 Olympus engines, each producing over 30,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner lit. An automatic system constantly shifted fuel around the airframe to keep its centre of gravity balanced as it burned through it, something no aircraft had done before. Blown flaps let it land at a crawl on a runway a fraction the length any comparable jet needed. It carried terrain-following radar that could, in theory, fly itself at treetop height in the dark. When it finally flew on the 27th of September 1964 with test pilot Roland B. Beaumont at the controls, it was faster and further ahead of anything else in Europe. The chief designer of the rival Hawker aircraft firm, Sidney Cam, put it best when he said every modern aircraft has 4 dimensions: span, length, height and politics. The TSR-2, he said, had only gotten the first 3 right. He had no idea how right he was about to be proven. Here is where ambition turns against itself. An aircraft this advanced was also brutally expensive, and every month it slipped, it got more expensive still. The original 1958 estimate for the whole program was around £35 million. By 1964, the true bill, research, development, and a production run of roughly 150 aircraft was forecast at something close to £750 million. The cost per aircraft alone had climbed past the cost of an entire squadron of the fighters it was meant to replace. At the same time, an American alternative appeared, the General Dynamics F111, sold to the British government as a cheaper ready-made substitute that was, on paper, already flying. It wasn't finished, it wasn't cheap. Almost none of that would turn out to be true. But in 1965, it was exactly the argument a new government looking to cut spending needed to hear. On the 1st of April 1965, April Fool's Day, as more than one witness at the time couldn't help but point out, the Cabinet met twice and decided to cancel the TSR-2 outright, in favour of an option to buy up to 110 F-111s from the United States. The decision wasn't announced to the air crews or the engineers or the thousands of workers who'd built it. It was announced almost as an aside, buried inside the Chancellor's annual budget speech on the 6th of April, 5 days later. Defence Secretary Dennis Healey stood up afterward and told Parliament the programme had simply tried to combine the most advanced state-of-the-art in every field at once, and that Britain could no longer justify the bill for that ambition. The second prototype, XR220, was due to make its first flight that very same day. It never got the chance. The aircraft that had beaten the world to the runway was grounded before it ever left it, cancelled between one lunch break and the next. What happened next wasn't just a cancelled contract. It was closer to an execution. Within 6 months, the government ordered the jigs, the tooling, and the part-built airframes at Brooklands destroyed, not mothballed, not sold, not preserved for a future programme. Destroyed, so that no future government could quietly resurrect the project. The wooden mock-up was hauled to the end of a runway and burned. The only TSR-2 that had ever flown, XR219, was handed over to a weapons range and shot to pieces as a target. Britain didn't just cancel its most advanced aircraft. It made sure the country could never build it again, even if it changed its mind. The human cost followed just as fast. Engineers who had spent a decade solving problems nobody else in the world had even attempted didn't wait around for the next contract. They left. Within 10 months of the cancellation, one single firm alone lost more than 750 of its technical staff, many of them boarding flights to American aerospace companies who were only too happy to have them. Britain had spent 15 years building the most concentrated aerospace talent pool outside the United States, and in less than a year, a meaningful slice of it packed up and left the country for good. And here's the twist the government didn't see coming. The cheaper American replacement they'd cancelled the TSR-2 for wasn't cheap at all. The F111's price kept climbing the same way the TSR-2s had, and by 1968 Britain cancelled that order too, walking away from the American jet for the exact same reason it had killed its own. The Royal Air Force ended up flying the aging Buccaneer and the borrowed American Phantom to fill the gap. It would take until 1980, 15 years, for Britain to field an aircraft that could do what the TSR-2 had already been doing on its 24th test flight in 1965. Look at every combat aircraft Britain has built since 1965, and you'll notice something. Not one of them was built by Britain alone. The Jaguar was a joint programme with France. The Tornado was built with West Germany and Italy. The Eurofighter Typhoon needed 4 nations to get off the ground. On the civil side, the same lesson landed differently. Concorde was built jointly with France, and the expertise scattered by the TSR-2's cancellation fed straight into what would eventually become Airbus, the one place Europe did learn to outbuild America together. That's the real inheritance of the 6th of April, 1965. Not a cancelled aeroplane, but a permanent decision, never actually written down anywhere, that Britain would no longer try to do this alone. Every joint venture that followed wasn't really a strategy. It was a scar. Sidney Cam was right. The TSR-2 got the span, the length, and the height exactly correct. It was the fourth dimension that killed it, and Britain has been sharing the other three with someone else ever since. If you've ever stood in front of the two surviving TSR-2 airframes at Cosford or Duxford, silent, grounded, built for a future that got cancelled out from under them, tell me what it felt like in the comments. And if you want more stories about the decisions that quietly rewrote entire industries, subscribe before you go.